Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of NativeScript Air. Today we have Brad Martin here and Stanimira Vleva, and we'll be talking about how you lay out your applications. So here's Brad. Hey, Brad. How are you doing? You good? Brad, can you hear me?
The audio is playing back for some reason. Hang on.
Okay. We had it all working
There's a
before.
delay in the audio. Yeah, I can hear you. There's a delay.
Okay. That is strange.
Yeah.
I'm
gonna go off the Bluetooth speakers. I'm gonna turn those off.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, there's no feedback now. So yeah, anyways, I'm go off the Bluetooth speakers. I'm gonna turn those. Hear me now? That's weird. Do you hear that? Okay, yeah, there's no feedback now. I don't know what. So yeah, anyways, I'm go off the Bluetooth speakers. I'm gonna turn those.
I think you can speak now.
So yeah, anyways, I'm go off the Bluetooth speakers. I'm gonna turn those. It's like in a loop. Maybe I should drop out and join back. I don't know if that will fix it.
I think you can speak now.
I don't know what. Yeah, anyways, I'm go off the Bluetooth.
Yeah, maybe try that.
Okay, let me drop out and join back.
That was scary.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, these things happen every now and then, so it's not a big issue. But the important thing is, like, we eventually get to the point, because I really wanted for Brad to tell us about his experience with layouting the applications or building layouts for mobile applications, because as it's not all just about having stack layouts. So we got Brad back. Hey, Brad, you good?
Yeah, I realized what it was. Very silly mistake. I had the YouTube channel open in a different tab. That was hidden.
That's okay.
So, my mistake there, everyone. So yeah, I'm Brad Martin. Been using NativeScript for a while. Developer expert for NativeScript and a partner at InStudio. And I like doing the layouts with NativeScript. The UI is really what gets me excited about development, the front end. So that's me.
Cool. We also have Stanimira here. Stanimira, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, I work at the NativeScript team, and I'm pretty excited to hear about layouts and doing layouts for NativeScript apps, because I'm not an expert myself. So go on, Brad.
Cool. And basically, I'll just have a quick word about myself. So I work for the DevRel team in NativeScript, and then pretty much trying to kick off the NativeScript Air channel and then invite all the interesting guests I can think of. So if you think you have something interesting to talk about, reach out to me on Sebawita on Twitter. So yeah, let's get going. So Brad, tell me, why is a layout, like building layouts, an interesting topic? Like, why people should care?
For me, it's interesting because first off, it's important. It is what the end user is going to see and interact with. So it's the front end of your layout is important for your application. But what really is interesting about the layouts is the performance factor for me. So and it's challenging on anything. It's challenging on the web. It's challenging on native, because the more view components you put on the screen, it's obviously more work for the device, the computer, whatever you're running the platform on. It's more work to do. So for me, just the layouts are interesting because you can create some really amazing layouts, and they can be fantastic UI, but the performance could be terrible if you don't know the best way to properly structure the layout and take advantage of, you know, a few tips and tricks here and there, regardless of the platform. So that's why it's interesting for me.
I see. So do you sometimes like feel like you have to sacrifice what you want to show just to gain some performance, or is it more about just being more conscious of what you're doing when you're trying to structure how your application should look like?
There are times where I've pushed back on certain designs, and typically it's not an issue, but I've seen some pretty wild designed layouts, and when I've done everything I could performance-wise to optimize it, it still would suffer. Typically, that's not an issue though. So for me, it's really just creating good optimized layouts and reducing the complexity on how you're laying out. And specifically in NativeScript, I think of it as flattening the layout, and it's kind of similar to a JSON tree or a JSON structure, you know, a data structure, flattening that structure. The same thing goes for layouts, is how I like to approach it. The less nesting that you have in your layouts, typically it's better performance from what I've seen. So
what do you mean by flattening? Is it like you shouldn't have like too many layouts within layouts, or what is it?
Yes, typically that's how I teach people is the less nested layouts that you can use, the better, obviously, for performance, because each layout is going to have to do a measure, a draw, and then a render on the device. So each process takes a little bit of time. It's milliseconds, fractions of milliseconds even. I mean, it's really small, but obviously the more complex it is and the more nesting you have, those milliseconds start to add up. And so you'll start to see a performance hit as far as the rendering of your UI.
Okay. So do you have like the usual cases where you keep hitting the same performance issues, like maybe a couple of situations that we should all try to avoid?
Yeah, the most common thing is a lot of developers starting with NativeScript, most of them have a web background, I would say, from the ones that I've talked with and helped. So they come from the web, and everyone is, well, most people are familiar with the term div soup, where you have, you know, a div and you just keep nesting these divs and putting classes on them to set the positioning and everything. So people coming into NativeScript have this concept, you know, of what is a div, and the closest layout container for a div is a stack layout, as far as when you come from that web background in your layout. So what I see a lot is people continuously will just put stack layout and stack layout, and they'll just keep going and nesting to get the exact layout that they want. And when you're talking performance, that's usually not a good thing to do with your layouts.
Yeah, I think I'm guilty of overusing stack layouts all over the time, all over my application.
I started out doing the same thing. So I think everybody does, but once you see that there are other approaches and you see the performance hit that you can, or the performance gain from doing a different layout, maybe using the grid or the Flexbox or even the wrap layout for whatever you're trying to achieve. And by flattening the layout, like I say, you'll usually see a performance gain in the rendering time.
I see. So do you have like a go-to layout that you always think first?
The one that I always go with is the grid layout. That's just that is king for me. Sean on the Slack channel, he might have coined the term grid layout is king, and I have to agree with him. Almost every design I get, I see it, and as far as a mobile device is concerned, I usually imagine a table, and that's what the grid layout is. It's more or less a table. So if you're coming from HTML, you know, with your TD and your TR for your table row and everything, you can usually translate that into a grid layout pretty simply.
Cool. It looks like we should get a T-shirt saying grid layout is king. That would be a cool
if you'll make them, I'll buy one.
I'll get you one for free and one to Sean.
Okay.
That's for sure. Okay, so I guess there's two things on, like, one is performance and one making the applications looking nice. Let's start with just making things look nice first. Like, do you have any like tips on kind of like how to actually scaffold your application, or at least to begin with, so that the application looks nice, or like semi decent?
The templates, the core templates that NativeScript has, are, as long as you use the core theme, the NativeScript theme, you can provide some decent styling for your application. I'm not a designer, so I won't claim to be some amazing design god in any fashion at all. So I typically stick with the core theme for just the basics. And go from there as far as making things look nice. But that's typically not a focus I have. Luckily, I have a lot of designers that we work with, and they provide the fancy, nice designs for me.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, because like I tend to, like, when I build the application and I try to make it look decent, like one of the first things I always say is like move the labels or my buttons or all my components like away from the edge of the screen. Because like if you add just like a very basic label, like let's say you have label text field, and they all like stuck right to the edge of the screen, just looks horrible. But if you use the theme and you just add a little class saying like margin left 5, that automatically looks pretty nice. So like even simple things like that makes already straight away a very big difference. Like that's what I think.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, yes. As far as padding and margin, and that's what I use the core theme for, is a lot of the padding and the margin classes to get the layouts looking somewhat decent, for sure.
Cool. So I guess like we can jump into performance, because that's probably the thing where people know about the least. So like, how do you assess the performance? Like, do you use any special tooling, or what is like what is good in your opinion, or what is unacceptable?
Yeah. Well, running the application in the emulator using live sync. Eventually, once you get a pretty decent application going, you might start seeing some rendering issues as you're running it in the emulator. So there are tools for Android and iOS to where you can actually dig in and profile them. And I want to show off that as far as Android is concerned, which is my main focus typically, is Android. I'm not a very superb iOS developer, and I try to stay away from Xcode and all the native iOS stuff as much as I can. But as far as Android, yeah, there's the Android Device Monitor tool, which is part of Android Studio, and that's where you can actually profile the measuring, the drawing, and the layout phase for all the native view components when you're running your application, and you get the times for those passes, and that's how I dig into really heavy layouts if they start choking on the performance when they are rendering. And there's another thing it's not technically related to the layouts, but the life cycle of the page when you are navigating in NativeScript. A lot of people have issues when they're navigating to a page to another page, and they'll see the UI kind of freeze for momentarily, a quarter of a second or something, and that's typically related to using a different page cycle event as you navigate. So that's something else kind of to consider. But my main thing is actually focusing on the specific layout of a screen or a page, and how long it takes it to render. So if you want, I can dig into that now as far as the device monitor. Yeah. So let me open up Android Studio here, and I'll share my screen so you can see.
We could always try to look at the reflection in your eyes.
Let's see. I've got it going. Once I get Android Studio open, I'll share the screen.
Cool. So what is the installation process like? What are the things I would need to install to use what you just described? Like, is that
really, it's just Android Studio.
Right.
No, you can download Android Studio, and typically that's kind of required, I think, to get going with NativeScript now. I think a lot of the Android SDKs, it's actually the preference now is to use Android Studio for your SDK manager instead of the older tool where you could actually manage the SDKs for Android. So now you can do it all through Android Studio, and I believe that's what Google has been pushing people towards.
Cool. All
right, so let me share my screen here. There is one command, I forget the specifics, but I beat my head against the wall for probably an hour one night when I started trying to get Android Studio and the device monitor set up. It's different, I think, on Windows and Mac, of course, but there is a command, and it basically gives access to the device monitor to do what it needs to do. It's on the setup for the device monitor on Google's website. I just forget the exact command. It's been so long since I've ran it, I forgot about it, but that is something most people will probably have to do.
Okay.
So let me share my screen here. I've got Android Studio open. All right, so you can see my screen now?
I can see it, yep.
Okay, so I've just opened Android Studio and just picked a blank application, just one of their starter applications, because if you open Android Studio and go to the tools and you don't have an application open, you won't have access to all the different tabs that Android Studio provides. So I just open up the default. But you basically go into Tools, Android, and there's the device monitor. And if you have a device connected to your machine or an emulator running, it should pick it up once you open it.
Cool.
Get that back here. There it is. Takes a second to load, but it's not the prettiest tool either, but it works wonderfully. So
performance is never pretty, right?
That's right. That's right. So I've got my emulator already open here, and so the device monitor picks up the emulator and the application that is running here, which is this DevDays application that I started a while back. So if you just select that, it should start, and here you go. Here is the actual layout, the native layout, which there's nothing here right now except for a label, but you can see all the pieces that go into the Android layout for the screen. So starts with the Decor View, which you can kind of zoom in here and see your layouts. And right now, once you've started this, there's no performance being tracked or anything. You're not, because we started it after the fact, so there's no measuring or anything happening. But you can see here, that is what we see here. So here's the Decor View of the application. So
oh, cool.
Yeah, so you can actually, and you can poke around here, and we'll add some stuff to the screen so you can see, but let me zoom back out and dig in here. If you get into, there it is. So you see there's a stack layout that I have on the screen, and there's a text view, and there's that image view, which is in the action bar. So you can kind of poke around and see how this whole tree comes together more or less. But the performance side of things, what you'll want to do when you have this open is really simple. You can pick where you want to start with the processing as far as tracking. So if you go here to this content layout, you just come over here in the menu and you just click this icon, which basically processes the whole tree from where you're starting. And so you push that, and then it actually is going to run the layout, and you'll see all these different measure times and layouts and the draw. And so for this, again, it's really simple. So, 8 milliseconds to draw it. I mean, it's that's nothing. So you're not going to be concerned if your layout takes 8 milliseconds to draw. But another interesting thing are these circles. Do you see those?
Yep. I was actually just thinking what they are.
Yeah, so those are, so you might be thinking, oh my goodness, this toolbar here has red, 3 red circles. Well, they're actually like relative to the entire processing time. So it's not like this toolbar is the worst offender in what we've just done. It's, I forget the exact wording that Google uses in the tools documentation, but it's all relative to what you've just profiled, more or less. So don't be alarmed if you have something with 3 red dots. It's still, look at it. I mean, it's still, I don't know if you can see that, it's 4 milliseconds.
It's not too bad.
So it's not, it's not something to be concerned about. So don't be too alarmed if you run this and everything has a red and a yellow circle. It's not setting off any alarms. So it's all relative. So, but anyways, that's really how you can dig into the performance as far as how long something takes to render. So for an example here, let's see if we can't add a little bit more complexity to, can you see the editor there?
Yep.
We'll just add the icon. We'll add maybe a text field here. And another text field. We'll sync that, let it run. It should sync right over. Okay, so again, nothing pretty here, but we've added the image and the 2 text fields. So once we come back in here, you should be able to reprocess this. Well, if it'll, okay.
I think it's just reloading.
Yeah, let me re-hit it again here.
So I guess like profiling the views is basically, affects how fast it runs, because it has to save all that data, right?
Say that again. So it affects it how now?
So like if you run the application without the profiler, like the device monitor, then probably it's gonna run faster than with the device monitor, because I would expect it to take some time as well.
Yeah, it takes a little bit, but it's still, still a fraction of, it's nothing major. Okay. I might have to restart the device monitor. Never seen it freeze up like that. So let me restart it. Typically, you don't have to do that. You should be able to request it to layout, and then it just refreshes the tree there, the view tree. And so then you can just profile it again from wherever you want to. So I just wanted to show just adding a few things and how to do that and make sure it's clear.
All right. I guess like the monitor got stage fright.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's weird.
By the way, can you obtain that data in some other like format, like export it to XML or something like that?
Instead as far as, say that again, Stanimira?
I said, can you obtain that data from the analysis from that monitor in some other format? Like, can you export it to an XML or just get the plain?
Oh, yeah. I've never done that, but I want to say, as I was poking around in this tool several months ago, that I did run into some export, but I forget what option it was, or if that was actually, it might have been an Xcode. It looks like I've got some errors here, so I don't know what's happening in terms of the emulator not picking up. That's really odd. But basically, so using the device monitor that Android Studio provides is the best way, in my opinion, to track the performance of your layout. So I just really wanted to show that off. And then Xcode has something similar. But again, I'm not a great iOS developer, so I try not to get too much into Xcode. and my main focus is Android. So once I've pretty much went as, optimal as I can on the Android layout, I usually don't worry too much about profiling the iOS layout. Obviously, if it's an issue for you, you'd want to, but Xcode provides a very similar process in terms of getting those details, and we can look at that also.
Yeah, that'll be definitely interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know why the hierarchy view is not showing. I've never had this issue, so we might just move on to the Xcode and see exactly. It may not be connecting to the emulator. Something might have happened on the emulator to where it's not picking up.
Yeah,
for some
maybe.
reason. It's really weird. So let me open up Xcode here.
Yeah, let's do that from Xcode, because you already showed us how it looks.
Yeah, and then Xcode has this really, really neat thing where it actually will expand your view into like this 3D model. And so it's really, really cool to see how that works.
Ooh. Can you see like AR and stuff?
Oh, no, that I don't know about that, but basically you'll have to be running the application either on a connected device or the iOS simulator. So here, same application, and it's just going to fire up the simulator, and then we'll look at the view really quick.
All right, I think we lost you for like 10 seconds. So
did I drop out?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically in Xcode, did you hear all this about running the application?
Yep, and then I think I lost you after that.
Okay, yeah, you just want to start up the application in the simulator or a connected device, and then once you do that, you can actually see the view hierarchy. Same process as Android Studio when you're looking at the device monitor tools.
Cool. So basically, once that launches, we should be able to see a similar hierarchy then.
Yes. And you can see all the different native view components that it takes to render your application. You can actually look at all the properties and everything, as far as the colors, the sizing, the margins, the paddings. You can look at everything. It's really cool.
Nice. I'm looking forward to that.
As soon as the simulator decides to kick, there it is. So more or less, this is the Dev Days app that I had, and it was like a Twitter clone. So the layout's a little bit more complex than what I had running on Android. But once you're here in Xcode, do you see Xcode open here?
Yep.
Here at the bottom, basically, it's like the debug panel, and this icon right here, debug view hierarchy. You just open that up. And I clicked it. There we go. So you can see here it's capturing the interface, and then it's going to show what's running in the simulator.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so, and you can see all these different wireframes, and those are, everything here is a different view component. You can hover around and everything. And here on the left is the hierarchy, obviously. So it starts with the window, and then you can drill down to each specific view that gets rendered out.
That gets very nested.
Yeah. It's it can be kind of odd to look at actually, but this right here is basically a list view, which is the UI table view on iOS, the native component. And so right here you can see it's the main content of this screen. But the cool part about the view hierarchy in Xcode is this right here. You can actually take this panel, let me move this over, and you can rotate this this 3D model, so you can see everything that it takes to create the application screen. Do you see that?
That's really cool.
Can you select layers, or
say that again?
Can you select the different layers there while you're rotating it? Oh, nice.
Yeah. You can move around, and you can highlight the different sections. of the application as you move it around. And you can also, all these different tools here, you can take away the depth that it takes to render, as you can see there. And there's different options as far as like getting rid of the wireframes and everything. Yeah, here it is. You can actually just drop those wireframes and or show wireframes, show the contents only, or show both. And so I typically stick with both just so I can see the view layouts and how it works as far as what it's drawing. So
that looks pretty amazing. I think I already know what I'll be doing tonight. Just spinning around my applications.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to poke around and let it show you that, you know, that 3D model of your application, so you can see each view component. You know, like I said, you can see the bounds of it. You can see, you know, the different padding, the margins on it, and these are buttons right here. And here, if you can see in the view hierarchy, there's the button over here. Oh, yeah. And there's the label inside of it. So you can get down and see exactly what you're looking at, and that's this button right here. So you can see there's the button, and that is the space it's consuming, and then there's the button label right inside of it. And so you can actually see all of that. It's pretty cool. And I have not mastered the profiling in Xcode. Like I said, I don't do a whole lot in Xcode. I stay with Android. So I'm sure there's a way you can actually profile each view component and the measure and the layout and all that stuff, but I've never figured that out. I don't know if any of you have either.
No, I haven't tried that tool before.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool. And so that's really the way I go about profiling is I stick with Android Studio just because it's more familiar. But if you're an iOS developer, I'm sure there is a way you can actually profile each one of these view components in the view hierarchy and get some really good information as far as the rendering time that it takes. So, but that's about all I try to do in Xcode. I try to stay out of there since I'm not really an iOS native developer.
That's fair enough.
By the way, we're using that tool for debugging our layouts. So yeah, whenever there's a problem, this Xcode, the thing that's provided from Xcode is pretty cool to debug and see what's rendered and how much time it takes and so on. So yeah, I definitely recommend playing with that.
So the NativeScript dev team uses the same tool there in Xcode. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, that's right.
Oh, that's awesome.
Is there anything specific that we're using like internally from there?
Well, it's actually what Brad just showed. Playing with the different layouts and debugging each of them, and also analyzing how much memory they takes to render and so on. And yeah, I'm not sure for Android, but I think we're using the same thing while developing the layouts there. The monitor from Android Studio. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, they're pretty cool, and they come out of the box with Xcode and Android Studio.
Nice. I think, yeah, it looks like definitely something I should invest more time and try to learn, because it looks like everybody around me is using it already.
Yeah, it takes some time though. It took me a while to figure out how to use the device monitor in Android Studio. But once you do, and once you see, you know, like you take some nested layout and you profile it, and you see the time that it takes to draw, and then you try to optimize that layout, you can actually see a really good performance gain. And I talked about that at Developer Days. I had a layout, basically. Let me see if I can share this layout really quick.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
In VS Code. Let's see. So right here, this was the same application that was running in Android a while ago. Let me close this. And it was basically that each tweet here in the list view, I started it with a stack layout, and there it is. So it's got the class of tweet, but the what I did was I took a stack layout and I just continued using stack layouts to create that that look of the Twitter feed. And so when I profiled this, the time to draw it, it was up there. It was over 100 milliseconds. I don't recall the exact time that I mentioned. I had it in my slides, and now I don't recall it from memory, but I believe it was like 150 milliseconds that it took, which again is not, it's not terrible, but I was interested to see if I could take that same layout, but possibly use a different layout instead of the stack and get better performance. And so that's where the device monitor tool really came handy. Was I took the same layout that the Twitter feed gives you, and I converted it into using a grid. Get rid of this. You'll see here, there's a grid layout, and you see there's no more nesting of all those stack layouts because we're using the grid and the rows and columns, the row span, the call span properties to position those child views. Profiled this approach, it was approximately somewhere between 70 and 85 milliseconds. So it was about a 50% performance gain as far as the rendering time took for those native view components. So that's where the device monitor tool really comes in good use, is if you have a layout and you want to try to optimize it, or if you're curious that you can, then that's where you can see what kind of performance gain you'll get when you do optimize your layout.
Yeah, because I guess like unless you have like a gain of like 2 or 3 seconds, you won't be able to just eyeball it, right? But that's why we need some additional tooling to just show us that we move in the right direction.
Yeah, for sure. You're not gonna visibly see, 100 milliseconds. That's not gonna show up for you. So that's where the tools come in use.
Wow, yeah, that's actually really nice, because it is something that it is not immediately obvious that just like having a few more stack layouts could cause a problem. While if you put everything within a grid, it could be nicely laid out.
Yeah, and those times that I just mentioned, going from the 150 milliseconds with those nested stacks to the 75 millisecond time with the grid, that was just the list view. So that didn't factor in the action bar or the tab view that was also on the Twitter mock-up that I did. So that was just one component. Even though that was the largest, that was just one component that I was profiling with those times.
Yeah. So one thing I tried to do at one point, like I had I was using a list view, and then within the list view, I had a stack layout that was basically dynamic. Like what was it? Oh yeah, it was like a football fixtures. So each item in my list view would be a specific day. And then, for example, if there were 3 football matches on the day, then it would be like 3 lines high. If there were 10 games, then it was like 10 lines high. And I noticed that like that was actually causing some like sluggishness when I was trying to scroll. Like, do you have anything to kind of like work around that? Like any tricks?
Well, the list view. List views are different than just hard coding your main layout. If because the list view natively it's using a technique similar to virtual scrolling, which some web developers might be familiar with, where the view components are actually being recycled as they scroll, and so the data is just being manipulated onto those view components. So the list view, it's a little bit harder to track the performance, but again, it all comes back to the complexity of the item template. So in your case, like you were saying, each some were 3, some were 10. It would really just depend on the item template for the list view. Were you using like stack layouts for each one, or did you have like 10 labels inside of a stack layout? Do you remember?
I think I had a stack layout that would have like 3 labels inside.
Yeah.
And then it was like
that
more complex.
Yeah. I mean, if it gets, obviously if it gets more, if you nested a bunch, then you're going to have some hits. But overall, something like that's probably not a big issue. But you can definitely, again, you can profile it. You can profile the list view in the same tools and see as far as the times that it takes to do that, the drawing and everything.
I just want to ask you one thing. Was it an Angular app or a NativeScript?
It is a plain NativeScript. No Angular and not in that application.
No, I was asking about that Sebastian app that he was talking about.
Oh yeah, pretty much everything I write is Angular. So yeah, it was inside Angular.
That's the nice thing of having of different stack layouts. It shouldn't be a problem. But for example, if you have ng for some other dynamic directive inside that item template, it can be a problem because the thing that Brad mentioned, the scrolling, actually each item that gets out of the display, it gets recycled and is used for the next item that is shown. You get it like when you're scrolling, the ones that stay out of the view, their templates are recycled and used for the next ones. But if the template is dynamic and it can be measured at not at runtime, but it can be measured for the next one fast, it won't be reused. So yeah, that can be a problem. But I think for Angular, we have a solution when you can use different item templates. For example, if you have a ngIf, that's the simplest solution, but you can have one template for truth statements, what one you can show for when the condition is true, and another template for false statements.
I see. But what if I have like a variable number of items, like it could be 2, could be 4, could be 7? Like, do you think? Because that
no, the number of items in the list view shouldn't play a role at all. So it should be, if you have a item template and inside you have different items, yeah, that can be a problem because the item template can be measured if you have a variable number of things to show.
I see. But I guess like if I have like either scenario A, B, or C, then I could just have 3 ngIfs, and that could definitely help.
Or just switch, for example.
That's cool. So there's another. I'm gonna move to next topic. So there's obviously we have Flexbox layout. It's been around for a little while already. But it looks like some people are like still trying to get their heads around it. Like, what's your opinion? Like, do you find Flexbox layout like something that is harder to use than grid layout or easier? How you take that?
For me, I stick with the grid just for the simplicity. I've used the Flexbox layout. And it definitely has its use cases, specifically targeting, different device screens. So things wrap nice and neat, and you don't have, one button consuming the entire grid. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear.
No, my screen glitched for a second. So yeah, so you don't, so the Flexbox, I think there's a more learning curve with the Flexbox. But I think that's the same for the web. When they designed the Flexbox layout in NativeScript, they tried to keep it, pretty similar for web developers to transition over and use the Flexbox layout in NativeScript. And so it's really, really cool. For me, the grid layout's just simpler, so I can get things done faster because the way I've just mastered the grid layout. But the Flexbox definitely has its advantages when you're targeting different screens and different device sizes.
Cool. So I have to say, like, initially when I heard of Flexbox layout, like I really wanted to learn it, and there was something. There's an interesting resource, like TJ pointed to me. It's called Flexbox Froggy. Have you seen that?
I've not seen that. I think it's, I've seen the Flexbox Zombies. Have you seen that one?
That was like I heard of it. I never went through it.
I think that's, who was it? Dave, is it Geddes? I think that's how you say his last name. I think he does the ng-conf. He's one of the organizers, maybe. He did the Flexbox Zombies, and that's actually a pretty cool approach to learning Flexbox for sure. I have not done it, but I've poked around and looked at it, and it was really interesting.
That's cool. So we have pretty much Flexbox Froggy and Flexbox Zombies for anyone that wants to learn. I can vouch myself for the Froggy. Froggy is super cute, and every now and then I find myself coming back to it. But I definitely need to check out the Zombies, because it's actually quite simple. Like once you can see it and play with it visually. So yeah, so somebody's actually writing on live chat saying flexboxfroggy.com. That's pretty much where we have to go.
Nice. Yeah,
so,
I would like to learn. I would like to master Flexbox. Let me say that, because I have the basics down, but there's so much to Flexbox that it almost overwhelms me mentally. All the different properties, as far as like aligning and wrapping. You can turn things off, you can turn things on, and so there's a lot of different properties to working with Flexbox, and so it's just more work for me typically when I'm doing my layout side. Again, I stick with the grid just because the simplicity of the rows and columns and doing layouts.
Yeah, somebody's as well pointing out that there is another tutorial for the grid called cssgridgarden.com. So I haven't heard of that.
I haven't heard of that one. Now, and then that's another thing, is the whole CSS grid that's coming, or that's on the web now. I think every browser supports CSS grid. Have you worked with that any?
I haven't tried, no.
No. And somebody did bring up possibly supporting CSS grid in NativeScript, like I guess creating a new layout class that would be similar for the CSS grid on the web. So I think Microsoft Edge just landed support for it recently, and so like every browser now supports it, but supposedly it's like this hot new way to do your layouts on the web, and so I'm sure if enough interest comes around, it would make its way to NativeScript, because it seems pretty powerful from what I've read. I just haven't worked with it.
I mean, that definitely sounds like a great idea, because I'm all up for code sharing between web and mobile. And if we can have layouts that are shareable between the two, that definitely helps a lot. Because that's where, for example, I like Flexbox layout. Like I can actually lay out my both web and mobile application in a very similar way and use the same properties, and I can expect the same results. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess it's as well, like, I don't think there is one layout that works the best for everything, except for obviously stack layout. It is the best for everything, but all the other ones, it always depends, right? I guess like grid layout is pretty good if you know upfront what your layout's gonna be, but it's probably like again, Multishiv is pointing out, if you set up your grid and then all of a sudden you have to add something in the middle and you need to add a new row or new column, then you have to recalculate everything, and that kind of can be fiddly.
Yeah, that is a good point. I run into that quite often. I don't. It doesn't really bother me, I guess, because I've done it so long. But that is a good point, and I guess that's probably where Flexbox would be a better option in your layouts, wouldn't you say?
It might be, actually. Flexbox is easy to kind of add things in the middle and stuff. So, or just use stack layout.
Or just nest your stack layouts all you want. Yeah, you do that.
Yeah, I'll be me. So again, there was a question about if we're using a repeater, and then we have to kind of like set up, specify item layout, and if it's a stack layout, like for every item in the repeater renderer, does it affect performance? Like
yes, because the repeater doesn't recycle those view components like the list view. So if you have a repeater and say you have 20 items in the repeater, you probably want to switch that out for a list view. Yep. Depending on your design, I mean, you may get pushed into a design where the list view wouldn't make sense. Hopefully that's not the case, but if you did, then the thing to remember is that the repeater, so if you have a repeater and it's a stack layout, but you bind it to 20 data objects, you're going to have 20 different stack layouts that get drawn on the screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess like 20 is still kind of okayish, but like imagine you loading data synchronously and it could be 10,000 items. Then you literally just kill your device, like you're running out of memory.
Turned into it melted.
Yeah. Well, like list view has like out of the box kind of like load more items, etc. So yeah, I think as soon as you have more than what you can fit on the screen, I think you should switch to list view. That's at least my idea.
Oh, for sure.
Definitely. If you need some more complex templates or layouts inside the list view, you can use the RAD list view from the Pro UI, which also has recycling.
Yeah, and now Stanimira, does the RAD list view, does it have its own like recycler? Isn't that like a custom recycler on Android? Do you know?
I'm not sure about that, but I think it's actually using the native Android recycler.
Okay, I didn't know if it wrapped an extension of the recycler that maybe the NativeScript team or the UI controls team had worked on.
Sorry, the RAD list view is a wrapper around a native Android library. So it's basically written in Java and has a wrapper. So it's really fast because it doesn't have to make many calls between JavaScript and Java. And it's basically written in native Android for Android,
cool.
Of course.
Yeah. And then the you mentioned the item templates. That's something I've only ran into a couple of times. Have you either of you worked with like the item templates on the list views, like using different templates inside your list views?
Yeah, I have used them. So basically what happens if you have different item templates, they get into two different recycling pools. So for example, when one item from the first template gets out of the screen, it gets into the first pool. And when we scroll to a similar item that uses the same template, it gets reused. So yeah, we just change the bindings inside. And for the second template, it gets in a second recycling pool. And that's basically how it works, yeah. So definitely, if you need different item layouts inside, just use different templates.
That's good to know. I probably could have done that on the Twitter clone that I was working on, because different, tweets are different. Some tweets have an image attached to them, whereas some are just text, and so those are different layouts together. And that's something I didn't think about, was using item templates for that. I just binded to the visibility, and if that image was null, I just hid the image. So I'm curious. I'm sure there's probably some performance gains there if you use different item templates and you're not binding to that visibility. I'm sure the team's probably looked at that, but I've never, I haven't profiled that. So I'm curious. I might have to do that sometime.
It would definitely be cool to see the benchmark for that.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
What were you going to say, Stanimira?
No, that was it. I mean, I agree. You can try to benchmark the different things, and maybe for a simple layout, just two labels and an image, it won't be that big the difference. But you can go further and like try some more complex item templates and measure them.
Cool. Actually, we've got a question for you, Stanimira, from the audience. So it's about the ripple effect. Are we planning to provide support for it? Do you know if that's coming?
I don't know. I think it's not planned for the next release, but vote for it on GitHub and we can consider it. So yeah, definitely not the next month, but if the community wants it, we'll definitely look into it.
All right, so that's the cue, guys. Like if you want something, create a GitHub request and we'll look into that. That's pretty much how we've been working for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I think there is a feature request for that on GitHub. Just upvote it.
Yep, upvoted, commented. Pretty much like if any new feature is not about just like I want A or I want B. Like we want to know as well like about your use cases and kind of like help us even design the API for it. Because if we misinterpret what you want, then we might not be able to give you the best solution. And also, if there's three different people with three different opinions, like it's always good to hear about all the possible options, because otherwise it's easy for us to as well miss some edge cases.
Yeah, sure. And for some features that the community wants to be implemented, we definitely will take into account if they provide some use cases, and like if we don't have anything to implement that actual use case, we'll see that having that feature implemented is important. So yeah, definitely we're pretty excited when we see people writing GitHub with real use cases and with feature requests, and we always take them into account.
Cool. Got one more question, then like I guess like we'll be finishing off with some questions. So is rotate X and rotate Y available? I think I was trying to actually use it with Angular animations and I couldn't get it to work.
I think it is, but I'm not sure. I've definitely seen that CSS property, and I can try if it's working, but I think we have a support.
Yeah, someone actually
never
said
actually tried it. So is that property for different layouts or for some specific control, UI control?
I mean, when I was trying to use it, I was trying to use it within Angular animations. So I could, for example, rotate any component, but I couldn't just rotate it by X-axis or Y-axis. But I guess that's different from animations to using it as just like a CSS styling. I think it's just rotate for now.
I'm pretty sure we have examples with animating with rotation. Yeah, but for plain JavaScript, we have UI tests even. I gotta take a look, and yeah, I can answer that on YouTube later.
Yeah, we could probably have a look at it later. It's always difficult to talk about some things like if you can't verify on a computer. Cool. So Brad, we're pretty much nearing to the end. Like, so what would be your like top 3 tips then to anyone that is like wants to lay out their application nicely, especially to beginners?
Top 3 tips. I'll give you a top 1 tip. It's to flatten the layout. Flatten it as much as you can. Use the grid, use the Flexbox, and don't nest stack layouts, one after the other, and don't go crazy with it like Sebastian. And I think you'll be okay. And then I think there is probably one other tip. It's to get familiar with the tools. With NativeScript, these are native apps. They're, so you need to have some familiarity with the native tools that are provided for Android and iOS. You know, if you want to do more than just a simple, you know, application, if you really want to take advantage of the power of NativeScript, I think having some familiarity with those tools is really beneficial.
That sounds cool. I've actually got one from myself to add on top of that. One of the issues I noticed, like from talking to people, you know, like in a community, is very often people struggle designing like the UI designs that they get from the designers, because mostly those designs are like done like for the web projects, as opposed like they're not mobile designs. So my idea would be like always try to, if you see that a design doesn't really make sense on a mobile, always push back on the designers, because I think pretty much 99% of the designers that are out there, they come from the web background, and not all the designers understand how mobile applications should be styled and look like. And then if you're trying to kind of put a web design into a mobile application, that's like trying to shoehorn a cow, right? So and I think this is at least like a good advice from me. Like you can save yourself a lot of tears and sweat by just kind of going back to the comments and say like, actually, I know I could technically do that, but does it really make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point to make for sure. I've done that 100 times. I've, you know, just kindly asked, you know, is there a different way we could, you know, achieve this, you know, same layout, but maybe tweak it a little bit? And typically it's not an issue.
Yeah, totally. Like, I mean,
depending who you're working with, I guess.
Yeah, but like, look just like at the Twitter application on the web and mobile. Look at Airbnb. Like they all feed the same data, but they're designed so differently in a way. So I think like it's always good to remember that you know, just because you're doing code sharing between the two or trying to make similar application doesn't mean that they have to look identically. That I guess that's my point. Stanimira, do you have any hints for us from the engineering point of view?
Oh, I think you said everything. Just remember using Flexbox layout. I actually prefer it. So just remember that it's not a div, and you should not nest it just because you can. And the same goes for, of course, for every other template. And of course, just spend some time to explore the different layouts and how you can use them in a mobile app, because yeah, probably that's the biggest learning curve in NativeScript, but we want to have a real native experience, so you need a native UI. And definitely we sometimes had that discussions about like, should we create a div, should we emulate the browser? And it just doesn't make sense. We always want our users to make the UI be more native. Just you can't use a div because it doesn't make sense on a mobile device. You just have to use the native layouts and create a user interface that looks better on a smaller device.
Cool.
So yeah, that's it.
So okay, this was a pretty good session. I think I've learned quite a lot, and I thought like I was prepared, like to that, you know, I knew everything you were gonna talk about, but it actually turns out that you surprised me quite a lot. So I'm really happy we had this session. So thanks for your time, Brad, and thanks, Stanimira. So I just got a couple of announcements. So we have a webinar for NativeScript 3.3 release tomorrow. So if you haven't signed up for it, go and do it now, or actually just wait 2 minutes after we're done here. And then we will have another NativeScript Air session on Monday the 30th. And that one will be talking about a NativeScript Sidekick, and we'll have a couple of our rockstar developers from engineering that were working on Sidekick. So please come over. If you have any questions, you can actually send them ahead to us. You could either like follow us on Twitter, so we are NativeScript Air, so you can send us some questions over there, or you could actually email us at nativescriptair@gmail.com. So thanks for watching us, guys. Thanks for being here with me, and then see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.